All right, serious question. Did we write off Texas A&M and LSU way too soon? Both of these teams lost in week one, and while I can't speak for everybody, obviously I can speak for myself, and I can speak for what I've seen and what I've heard on this channel in the comment section, in the call-in shows, all that kind of thing, and more importantly, what I haven't heard really over the last 4 or 5 weeks. LSU lost in week one to Southern Cal. Texas A&M lost in week one to Notre Dame. Point and laugh specials. We did the whole deal with that. And a lot of people, and I'm throwing myself in this boat, sort of wrote them off and forgot about them. And honestly, kind of just quit paying attention to them. Now, some people paid attention to Texas A&M during the Missouri game. Some people paid attention to LSU, I think, last week during the Ole Miss game. Both of those games, of course, were won by LSU beat Ole Miss, Texas A&M beat Missouri. Both of these teams are ranked now. LSU and Texas A&M. In fact, pull it up here. LSU is in the top 10. Now, okay, remains to be seen there, but right now they're ranked 8th. Texas A&M is ranked 14th. They're both 5-1, right? LSU with the win over Ole Miss. Texas A&M was off last week. They play at Mississippi State this week. LSU plays at Arkansas. So we'll talk about both of those games. Well, I'll just go ahead and tell you, is there anybody that thinks Texas A&M's losing to Mississippi State? I don't think so. Mississippi State's the worst team in the SEC. They're, 1-5, something like that. Texas A&M should go in there and get the win. Now, we've seen weird things in college football this season, just like we do every year in the world of college football. But, I mean, Texas A&M's going to be a significant favorite in that game. I can pull it up and see what the spread actually is on that game. I am curious. Now, these two teams play next week, by the way, LSU and Texas A&M, which is why I thought now would be a good time. Now would be a good time to talk about this. What is the spread on this game? Let's see. 15. Okay, Texas A&M's a 15-point road favorite at Mississippi State. I don't know that I would bet that game. I do think Texas A&M will win, but I don't know. 15 is a lot of points for a conference game. But so Texas A&M will win that game. Here's the ESPN breakdown or whatever. FBI gives A&M an 80.7% chance of winning. You can see here Texas A&M's a 15-point road favorite. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time breaking that game down. The Mississippi State quarterback had a good game last week against a bad Georgia secondary. But overall, Mississippi State is just a terrible team. They're 1-5, 0-3 in SEC play. Texas A&M 5-1, 3-0 in SEC play. And that's the other thing to consider here in this discussion about Texas A&M and LSU is, yes, they both have a loss. It was in week one. We kind of forgot about them and wrote them off. And I don't mean everybody. Obviously, LSU and Texas A&M fans, I'm not talking about y'all. You always have hope in your own team. I get it. And I'm not even here to shit on LSU and Texas A&M. I'm here to admit I've been wrong over the last few weeks to kind of ignore them and not pay attention to them. Every conversation that we've had, whether it's call-in show conversations or whatever it is, comment section back and forth about who's going to win the SEC, who's making the playoffs out of the SEC, all these kinds of things. None of those conversations have included Texas A&M or LSU since those week one losses. I'm just telling you they haven't. I'm guilty of it. A lot of people that are watching right now are guilty of it. But here we are halfway through the season, and these two teams are in better shape than Georgia, who already has a conference loss, better shape than Tennessee, who already has a conference loss, better shape than Alabama, who already has a conference loss. Now, of course, yeah, we're halfway through the season, but we're only halfway through the season, right? A lot more games to go. A lot of these teams are going to play each other. Texas A&M and LSU play not this weekend, but next weekend. So one of them is obviously going to catch a loss that weekend. Alabama and Tennessee play this weekend. Somebody's taking a second loss. Georgia plays at Texas. So either Texas takes their first loss or Georgia takes their second loss. So a lot of this, this is going to work itself out, but I don't even really, like most of my videos, I don't really know what the point of this is. Honestly, I wasn't planning on talking about this today. I sat down, I was getting ready to do another video, and I came across something about Texas A&M, and I started, and I was like, yeah, what about Texas A&M? And LSU, for that matter. I think the overall point of this video is a question for all of you. What chances are we giving Texas A&M and LSU now, halfway through the season, given that they're tied for first place in the SEC with no losses? What kind of chance are we giving these two teams to either make the conference title game, win the conference title game, which would give them a first-round bye? If they don't win the conference championship game, but they make the conference championship game, they're likely in the playoffs anyway. How many losses do we see here? And we'll pull up the entire schedules for both of these teams. But sort of to get this week's predictions out of the way, I think Mississippi State will lose to Texas A&M. And when we look at LSU, they're off this week, aren't they? No. They play Arkansas. What am I thinking? They're off this week. Now, this is going to be a good game. Let's pull this one up. LSU on the road at Arkansas. Arkansas has, I can't get the Oklahoma State game out of my head when it comes to Arkansas. That was one of the most disastrous second halves I've seen by both teams, by both coaching. It was just it was a hard game to watch in the second half. Arkansas had 650 yards of offense and lost the game. Turned around, had a big win at home against Tennessee. So Arkansas is sitting there at 4-2, 2-1 in conference. They only have one conference loss. Arkansas has got the same number of conference losses halfway through the season as Georgia, Bama, and Tennessee. Now, does anybody think they're going to finish? You know, that's maybe a different conversation. But anyway, LSU, you see here on the road at Arkansas, LSU only a 2.5-point favorite. So this game, at least according to the odds makers, is expected to be a lot closer than the Mississippi State Texas A&M game. So this one here is interesting. Now, I liked what I saw from LSU last week. They were down. They trailed that entire game. And while Nussmeier didn't play perfect and made some mistakes and some other, you can say the same thing about Ole Miss, obviously, or whatever. It wasn't a perfect game, but it was a great game with a great ending and a great finish and overtime and all that. But the thing I took away from that game is LSU was behind the entire game. They literally never led until the game was over, right? They were losing the entire first, second, third, and fourth quarter. They tied it up for the first time at basically the last play of regulation, almost. With the Nussmeier touchdown pass, sent it to overtime, and of course they win the game. They didn't give up. They kept fighting back. They kept clawing their way back. And Ole Miss is a good team. I know they lost to Kentucky, but you know that was a good win for LSU. And I think I'm not the only one, I don't think, that saw that last week and then kind of woke up the next day and went, "Wow, you know LSU's 5-1, no conference losses, a win against Ole Miss." Do we need to start paying attention or more attention here to LSU and Texas A&M going forward? Now, obviously, here my pick for this game is I think LSU will win the game. I think it's going to be a good game. I like that Arkansas quarterback from Arkansas. Arkansas is at home. They've given LSU fits at times in the past. I think this will be a really good game. It's a primetime game, 7 o'clock on ESPN. But I think LSU goes in there and gets the win and keeps on rolling. So to really kind of figure out where are we going from here with these two teams specifically, but really we could do this with a lot of teams at a lot of different conferences, we need to look at the remaining schedule. So we'll start with, I guess we'll start with LSU. Here's their remaining schedule. I know this is kind of hard to see. I'm doing it on ESPN instead of the schedule thing I normally use, but so they got the win against Ole Miss. They, of course, play at Arkansas this week, the 19th. Next week is a huge game at Texas A&M. And I talked about this for a little bit last night on the call-in show. We're about to see the best 5 or 6 weeks ending of a college football season that we've ever seen, period. You know, there's been a lot made of this 12-team playoff and how potentially it could take away some meaning from some games late in the year. Michigan, Ohio State has been the prime example. You know, last couple of years, that game has been played with both teams ranked in the top 5, and so kind of everything was on the line. Trip to the Big Ten title game, potential Big Ten championship, invitation to the 14 playoff, all of that on the line, right? And that might not be the case in most years going forward. Now, it's not the case this year because Michigan is terrible, but the theory being, well, that game's not going to mean as much anymore because if both teams are 12-0 or 11-1, it doesn't matter who wins or loses that game. Both teams are going to the playoffs. Well, I disagree with that it doesn't matter who wins or loses. Those two teams hate each other. The fan bases hate each other. The schools hate each other. Those two teams want to win that game regardless of what is on the line in terms of the outcome of that game. Plus, home field buys, so a trip to the Big Ten title game, which could potentially be on the line in that Michigan-Ohio State game, although it won't be this year, could be in years down the road, will still be a big deal because the first-round bye is a big deal in the playoffs. You could have Michigan or Ohio State, either one, entering that game with either 1 or 2 losses, which would mean losing that game would be a second or third loss, which could potentially knock them out of the 12-team playoff. And that's to me, that's why this November will be the best November we've ever seen in college football, because there are going to be multiple games every single Saturday, really starting now, where games are either playoff elimination games or they're close to being playoff elimination games. In other words, if you've got 2 losses right now, every game you play is basically a playoff elimination game. Not very many people think a 3-loss team is going to get into the playoffs this year. It's possible that one does, given the circumstances surrounding it. But generally speaking, I think most teams and most fan bases are aiming for 10-2 in order to get into the playoffs. So you look at a team like Ole Miss right now, they're sitting on 2 losses. Every game they play from here on out is basically a playoff elimination game. Either Alabama or Tennessee, one of the two, is going to take their second loss on Saturday. Whichever one of those teams loses, every game they play from here on out is basically a playoff game. And both of those teams have huge games. Tennessee plays Vandy, which looks like an interesting game. They play Kentucky. They play Georgia. Alabama still has to play LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn. I mean, I could go on and on. The Big Ten is going to be the same way. The ACC, all of these conferences, if you've got 1 or 2 losses right now, almost every game you play from this point forward is a huge game in terms of postseason placement. So anyway, kind of got off track a little bit there. But let's get back to looking at the schedule here for LSU. So they've got the 1 loss, but keep in mind it's a non-conference loss, right? So it doesn't affect their ability to make the SEC title game. They play at Arkansas. This is going to be a great game. I'm picking LSU to win. And then next week is this huge showdown. And look at just, I don't understand how people are saying the 12-team playoff. I can't get over it. I don't understand how people are saying that the 12-team playoff has ruined football. This is just one team we're looking at here. This is LSU. They've got 1 loss. They play at Arkansas this week. They've got no SEC losses. If they win, they'll still have no SEC losses. Okay, look who's up after that for LSU. At Texas A&M, then a bye week, and then home against Alabama, on the road at Florida, home against Vandy, home against Oklahoma. Every single one of those games for LSU is going to be massive. Massive. The next week's game at Texas A&M, the winner of, if Texas A&M and LSU both win this weekend, and I'm picking them both to win, those 2 teams are going to enter that game next week with 0 SEC losses. The winner will still have 0 SEC losses with 3 or 4 games left to play. Every game they play is going to be, look at these games. And again, you might not think LSU at Florida is a great game, but this is a rivalry game where potentially Billy Napier could be coaching for his job. Maybe he's already been replaced. Who knows? But LSU is going to be playing for a potential spot in the playoffs every week in November. Every week. Look at Texas A&M. They're in the same spot right now as LSU is. 1 loss, but it's a non-conference loss. So you look at Texas A&M. All right, at Mississippi State, an assumed win there. But then you've got the game against LSU next week, which we just talked about. After that, they play on the road at South Carolina. South Carolina might be the best team in the country that doesn't get bowl eligible. And you got them, and they have to play them there. They then get a non-con against New Mexico State. But look at the last 2 games. At Auburn. Now, Auburn's bad, particularly offensively, but this can be a tough place to play. And then the massive game at the end of the year with Texas. And I don't even need to try to talk you into believing that that's a massive game, the Texas A&M game. This is one of the most bitter rivalries in history of college football. It got taken away from us as fans 15 years ago due to expansion and conference realignments. And we're finally getting it back. It's in the last weekend of the regular season, which is rivalry weekend. It looks like Texas A&M and Texas are both going to be alive for the playoffs when that game is played. Texas A&M, even if they lose a game before then, it would only be their second loss and their first conference loss. That is going to be, it might be the biggest Texas A&M game ever played. Number one, we haven't seen it in 15 years, and so there's just the excitement of, hey, we get to see the game again. But if both teams are still alive for the playoffs when that game is played, especially if one or both of the teams have 2 losses, which would make that Texas versus Texas A&M game basically an elimination game, it will be the biggest Texas A&M game we've ever seen, period. The end of this season is going to be absolutely unbelievable. And this is just two teams that I'm talking about. This is just Texas A&M and LSU we're looking at here. I can pull up Ohio State's schedule right now with one loss and show you the same things. They play Indiana. Indiana's undefeated. They got to play Nebraska. Nebraska's having the best season they've had in a decade. They play at Penn State in a couple of weeks. They've got the Michigan game at the end of the year. And again, Michigan's not going to be playing for anything in terms of postseason placement. But do you have any idea what it would mean to Michigan if even though they're not playing for anything in terms of the postseason, what if Michigan is the team that knocks Ohio State out of the playoffs with a second or third loss in the last weekend of the season? Now, no one's predicting that to happen, myself included. I think Ohio State's one of the best teams in the country. But my point is, these games are going to be massive in the month of November, really starting this weekend with the Texas-Georgia game, the Bama-Tennessee game. Almost every single game that any team in the country plays that has two or less losses is going to be a massive game in terms of postseason placement. Elimination games every single week from now through the end of the season, which of course is rivalry weekend. How did I do predicting LSU and Texas A&M halfway through the season? I'm glad you asked. Let's take a look at Texas A&M. This is a screenshot from my preseason prediction video. I got the Notre Dame game right. Texas A&M lost. I also had Texas A&M losing on the road at Florida. They, of course, did not lose that game. They did beat Bowling Green. They did beat Arkansas. They did beat Missouri. And that's where we're at right here against Mississippi State. I predicted a win in the preseason, and I'm sticking with that. I'm predicting Texas A&M to beat Mississippi State this weekend. So as of right now, about halfway through the season on Texas A&M, I'm one game off. I had them losing at Florida. They beat Florida. Everything else I've gotten right so far. In my preseason prediction video, I have LSU beating Texas A&M. This is the Texas A&M video, so a loss to LSU. I don't know yet how I will predict that game next week. I need to see the two teams play this week. I have Texas A&M winning at South Carolina, winning at New Mexico, winning at Auburn, losing to Texas in the last week of the season. So I had Texas A&M at 1, 2, 3, 4 losses, but they're already one game better than I predicted because they beat Florida. If everything else goes like I predicted, they'll finish at 9-3. If they can beat either LSU or Texas and still hang on to win these other games that I have them winning, they'll be sitting there at 10-2. And a 10-2 Texas A&M is likely to get in the playoffs, even if they, for some reason, missed the SEC championship game. So that's sort of how I had the season going for Texas A&M this past summer when I did my game-by-game predictions. LSU, I am dead on the money so far with LSU. I had them losing week 1 to Southern Cal. They did indeed lose. I then had them reeling off 5 straight wins. They have reeled off 5 straight wins. They beat Nicholls, South Carolina, UCLA, South Alabama, and Ole Miss. I did predict them to lose to Arkansas in my preseason prediction video. And as you're well aware, because I just told you 5 minutes ago, in terms of my weekly prediction, I'm picking LSU to win this game. I was impressed with what I saw them do against Ole Miss last weekend. So I may end up being wrong here on my preseason picks. I then have them winning at Texas A&M, but losing to Bama and Florida. And I'll say this about LSU. They're likely to win one of these, and they might win them both. They might win them both. Their last 2 games are at home against Vandy, and then they play Oklahoma the last week of the season. Vandy's a good story this year. They're not. I know they beat Bama and they beat Kentucky, and look, they're going to get bowl eligible, and that's great. LSU should beat Vandy, and LSU should beat Oklahoma. So the season really for LSU, in my opinion, is going to come down to this Arkansas game, the Texas A&M game, the Bama game, the Florida game. Just again, look at the schedule of games. Every one of these games, I feel like I'm rambling on now. If I haven't proved the point by now, then I'm probably not going to prove it. So anyway, I'm taking LSU and Texas A&M to both win their games this weekend. And I think we are about to witness the absolute best November of college football that we've ever seen. Have a good morning.